The Intervention by Rob Sharpe. Copyright 2026.
It was only Sunday afternoon, but I had woken up earlier with a killer hangover. When I got up, I vomited the remnants of last night's festivities into the toilet. Rinsing my mouth out with Listerine and washing off my face, I decided it was time to stop. A Google search turned it up. Sobriety meeting, Wednesdays at 8 p.m., number 12 Bartlett Street. I took a screenshot on my phone, grabbed my dog's leash. "Come on, jukebox, let's take a walk." I stopped long enough for him to do his business on the strip of grass in front of the house, and then we headed toward the center of town. Drinking. 2 years ago, I lost my wife. Hell, let's be honest, she dumped me. Last year, I lost my job. Again. No point sugarcoating it, I got my ass fired. Why? One word: gin. Gin had worked its way into my bones. Yeah, I tried to quit. The first time wasn't by choice. It was either 5-day detox or go to jail. After that, I ran up an $8,000 tab at a 30-day treatment center. Yeah, well, up yours, Betty Ford. Worst of all was Alcoholics Anonymous. I mean, can you imagine people meeting 3 or 4 times a week in church basements, smoking cigarettes and guzzling shitty coffee from 6-ounce styrofoam cups, all of them having to remind each other about how messed up their lives are? The only honest one in my life was Jukebox, man's best friend, my only friend. That was my border collie, Juke. For 14 years, he had stuck by me through thick and thin. So Jukebox and I turned off Broadview on the Bartlett, a narrow street with cracked sidewalks and an occasional street lamp. Halfway down, we reached number 12, a real winner. No windows, only a small brick facade with an old worn door. A notebook-sized chalkboard hung on it, written in small but legible white chalk with the words Wednesday, 8 p.m. Genius, sure to draw a crowd, I said to myself. Back home, I fed Jukebox half a can of sardines mixed with dry dog food. For me, I wolfed down a microwave burrito smothered in melted Velveeta and topped with paste picante salsa. Then I pulled out the gin and a jar of olives. It's martini time. The next few days were a blur. I enjoyed my beverages because I knew the end was coming soon. Sure enough, hump day hit the calendar. Wednesday morning was running a little late again. Breakfast happened at 11:30 a.m. I chugged a 24-ounce Bud Light with 2 raw eggs I had tossed in for protein. Raising the empty beer mug, I said to myself, "Goodbye, happiness. Hello, sobriety." I fed Jukebox before I left for the meeting and hoped he'd recognize me without the smell of gin on my breath when I got back. 8:30 p.m., number 12 Bartlett Street. I walked into the meeting as if I owned the place and took a chair in the back. There were about 8 people sitting around the room. One guy in a wheelchair sat off to my left, missing a leg. Mr. Military, I assumed. Then there was that older woman sitting closest to the main guy at the front of the room, her head bowed, staring at the floor in front of her feet. It looked like skin cancer had chewed her nose clean off. Ladies and gentlemen, Mrs. Lon Chaney Sr. Then there was that big, bald, muscular Mexican sitting beside me, wearing a black tank top and half a bottle of Brute cologne. He looked like he'd had a run-in with Mike Tyson. Where his left ear used to be, there was a small hole rimmed in pink-scarred tissue. My kind of people, I thought. Then there was the top dog in the group, standing up front, who looked like a cross between that famous pastor Joel Osteen and Ichabod Crane. The room got quiet, and then Ichabod looked at me and said the same line I'd heard in every AA meeting. The only requirement is the desire to stop drinking. The room seemed to darken. It felt like it was just him and me in the room as he lowered his forehead in my direction, his dark eyes looking out from underneath an uneven set of scraggly eyebrows. "Are you willing to do whatever it takes to get sober?" Yeah, blah, 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 I quipped to myself. Then I stood up, put on my best poker face, and said, "I do," like I was getting married or something. "Done," said Ichabod. After that, I listened to the regular mumbo-jumbo that is said over and over at meetings like this. But then one of them talked about taking another drink. It was like someone poured an inch of water on the floor and threw down a live 220-volt cable. Their backs became rigid, and they looked at each other like it was a lot more serious than simply another hangover the next day.
Well, I slept late the next morning. Jukebox was standing over me as I woke on the sofa, demanding to be fed and taken out. When we got back, I wolfed down a half-empty to-go box of chicken chow mein and then looked around for my morning chaser. But where the hell was the gin? Evidently, I'd even run out of beer. I threw on my coat and headed down to the Albatross Hotel. They had a good bar in the basement, the Rathskeller. By the time I got there, it was noon, 5 o'clock somewhere, dark and cool inside. It took my eyes a minute to adjust. I grabbed a seat near the end of the bar and looked around. In a booth near the corner sat 2 young women. In the middle of the place at a small table was Mr. Military, that one-legged guy from the meeting the night before, sitting in his wheelchair. Across from him sat Blackbeard, a long-haired, skinny old guy in a baggy white shirt wearing an eye patch. The bartender came over with a slight limp. He was probably born with one leg half an inch shorter than the other and spent his life trying to convince people he was normal by wearing an insert. Mr. Limpalong brought a menu and asked if I was here for lunch. I looked around the room and said, "Lunch? We're in a bar, aren't we?" "Yes, sir, we are," he answered. I pointed to the 4 other people and asked, "And what do you think these other people are doing in a bar?" He looked around the room, then back at me, touched the menu he had placed on the counter, and said, "Well, sir, they are having lunch." "Well, butter my butt and call me a biscuit," I said, slapping my hand on the bar. "Okay, I'll have lunch as well. Make it a gin and tonic, please, and if it makes you feel better, I'll have a bag of pretzels along with my meal." I ended up staggering home around 4:30 p.m., feeding Jukebox and passing out on the sofa. Around 11 p.m., Jukebox's barking and growling woke me up. Then came a gentle knocking at the door. I told Jukebox to sit down as I swung open the door. Standing there under the porch light were 3 men. It was none other than Ichabod from the meeting, old Mexican One-Ear, and Blackbeard himself. I was still in a bit of a drunken stupor and rubbed my eyes and yawned. "Okay, I got 2 questions, fellas. First, how the hell do you know where I live? And next, why are you here? Let me guess, some kind of alcohol intervention, right?" The alpha dog, Ichabod, smiled and said, "As for your first question, you had put your home address on the welcome card yesterday. And is this an intervention? Well, may we come in? This'll only take a few minutes." "Yeah, okay," I said. "As long as you 3 promise you're not vampires, I'll invite you in." As soon as they came inside, Blackbeard asked if he could get a glass of water and headed for the kitchen. The other 2 and I sat on the sofa. "Okay, guys, what you want?" I asked, my head still throbbing. Ichabod spoke quietly, lowering his forehead and looking me in the eye. "Our group is very special. You came to us in desperation. You said you would do whatever it takes to get sober. You see, we are under a moral obligation to ensure you achieve this. And so, to answer your second question, this is why we are here. If you like, you may call it an intervention." Then the 2 of them stood up and led me into the kitchen, and there, waiting for us, was Blackbeard, standing next to the counter where he had just placed my wooden cutting board, and lying on it was my 8-inch chef's knife. I stopped short of the counter and turned back, but the Mexican standing behind me wrapped his arms around me and shoved me forward until I was right up against the cutting board. Panic set my heart racing as the stench of his body odor mixed with brute filled my nostrils. At the same moment, Blackbeard grabbed my left hand and forced it down onto the cutting board.
Ichabod hold the chef's knife up in front of my eyes to get my attention. He spoke slowly. "Now, the best thing for you to do is to relax. This is going to happen." He then pointed to my hands and said, "Also, I noticed while you were filling out the welcome card at last night's meeting that you are right-handed. We are not heartless. Therefore, we are going to cut off your pinky finger from your left hand. But don't worry, we already have a dish towel filled with ice and the phone set to call an ambulance." He continued, "It will be best for you to tell them at the hospital it was a cooking accident. We will dispose of your finger. I am sorry, but you need to suffer this loss to understand our sense of commitment to helping you maintain sobriety." Then, quickly, like he'd done it 100 times, he lowered the knife, slicing through the cartilage of the knuckle joint, surgically separating my finger from what was now his former hand. I watched in horror as they set my hand in ice and wrapped the towel around it. Holding my hand close to my chest, I stood there in shock as they called 911, put my finger in a bag, and took it with them as they left. I remember the pain, but it was a strange, dull pain. I guess I was in shock and disbelief at what had happened. I remember the ride to the hospital, the ER, the questions about how I managed to cut my finger off while cooking. I didn't respond much. It wasn't a crime, so no police were involved, and no one would believe the truth anyway. The following Wednesday evening, I was laying on my sofa watching TV when Blackbeard showed up at my door and asked if I wanted to go to the meeting with him. I honestly didn't know if I had a choice, but didn't want to press the issue. So I went back to the meeting, and everyone seemed a bit more friendly, even more understanding than they did at the first meeting. After all, I was the only one there with fresh bandages on. Things started getting better for me after that. I went every Wednesday night at 8 p.m. I stayed sober. Life carried on. A year later, on Christmas Day, I woke up to find Jukebox dead on the floor. Just old age, I guess. I buried him in the backyard and sat next to him most of the day. My buddy was gone. I felt as if my world had just ended. I made it through life for a few more days, but finally, on New Year's Eve, I ended up stopping by the liquor store and picking up a bottle of gin and a bottle of tonic water. "Happy New Year," I said to myself at midnight, finishing my 4th gin and tonic. I finally felt great. I realized alcohol wasn't a problem in my life. It even made the loss of my dog less painful. At that point, I just knew things were going to be easier from then on. That was until I heard a gentle knocking at my door.